Today we're going to be looking at something that's super important and one of probably the last steps you're going to do or would like to do before you get out on the road or out on the track. And that is suspension tweak. This is the purple RS4 with the OS 15 CV on it. And we're going to be doing two different things today. We have our mini scales here. And then we're also going to go through a tweak station. We're going to talk about why these two things can be important for your setup. So let's get the car on the scales and get ready to go. So now that the car is on the scales, this is what the scales tell us. If you take a look at each individual weight that it shows in grams, you add them all up and you can get the overall weight. At the same time, we can see specific weight bias from the rear when you add up the two scales on the rear, and the same for the front. In addition, depending on what type of preload is on the spring, it'll transfer that weight from scale to scale. So suspension tweak, we look at the overall weight of the chassis. We have big heavy components, for example, like the engine, transmission. We have distributed weight throughout the chassis. Generally speaking, the front of the car is going to be a little bit less weight than the rear. The fuel tank itself is going to have some amount of weight when it's full, and then of course when it's empty. So the weight bias between left side and right side of the car is going to change a small degree. That's why a lot of the formal race cars are going to have the fuel tank right there in the center, and that helps with that weight bias so it doesn't change as much. So the goal here is to get your tires directly in the center of the scale, all four on the center of the scales, and you go ahead and take a look at the scale and you add them up. So let's see what happens here. I'm going to push down on the bulkhead, and you can see that the scales increase and decrease as I put weight onto the car. So this gives us a little bit of information about how the suspension is tweaked or balanced or not. And this gives us some good information. And if I were to change the spring rate here, then it will alter the weight that's applied or the force that's applied to the scale. But that doesn't give us the overall information. So what we're needing to do is use something called a tweak station, so that when we do adjust the preload on all four sides, it gives us a balance, not only static right now like when it's sitting still, but also dynamic. And we'll take a look at that here as well. Notice right now from our right side, we're at 340 grams, and our left side is 464, almost 465 grams. The goal is to get both the left and the right pretty similar in weight, and that goes for the front as well. Right now we're at 428 and 280. So everything is imbalanced right now. So we're going to put on the tweak station. We're going to go through the basic steps on what to do and what to look for and how to adjust and how the tweak station works. So now we have portions of the tweak stand here. First thing for setup is we need to make sure that this bottom bar is level. And so we use a portion of the front portion of the tweak station to make sure that that bubble is in the center. This is an MIP version tweak station. This front portion goes on, and it's on ball bearings. The back side is static. So the other thing we want to do is place that front side on the top as well. Make sure that crossbar is also level, in which it is. So we put it together. There's the basic view of the tweak station, and let's go ahead and get the car placed on it. So what I'm going to try to show here the best I can is we have the back side, and we want to center up the back tires as best we are able on that grid, and then set up the front tires best we're able on the grid. Trying to make sure that the wheel nuts you use as kind of a positioning, and make sure that the car is put on to the tweak station as even as possible. And what we're going to be doing, the way that these tweak stations work, is that you push down on the suspension on the static side, the side of the tweak station that does not move. And what you're doing is, when you're pushing down weight, it transfers force to all four corners of the car. And then what we do is we come down here and we take a look at the bubble level. And right now you can see that the bubble level is inside the window, but it's not perfect. The goal here is to, while it's static at rest right now, to keep it in the center window. And then also when you push on it and provide a dynamic load, you want that bubble to try to stay still as much as possible, but also stay within the window. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my finger back here on the back center of the shock tower. Try to do it in as center as possible. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to take a look at the bubble level. And when I push on it, notice what happens. But you can see that bubble level moving. And if you watch carefully, you can see that the view, the left portion of the view on the camera, the car, is going down and the right side is moving up. So when we talk about the car, when I push down on the center of that back shock tower, the right side front of the car is going down, and the left side of the car is going up. What's happening is that the suspension is tweaked. When I push down here, there's more spring force applied here on this side, and it transfers through the car and it goes onto this side here, and it's putting more force on this side. So what you do is the static side that you're pushing on, you make adjustments to your spring load, and you can do it with the C-clips for shocks, or you can do it with adjustment threads like this, until you push again and you look down at the bubble level, and the bubble level stays more consistent. So what's happening is this side over here is sprung too much. There's a bigger preload than this side. So we can do one or two things. We're going to release this, we're going to unthread this, and we can put additional preload here on this side here. So we're going to wind this out some amount, and we're going to wind this in some amount. And every time you make an adjustment, push down on the chassis. Now look, we are right in the middle. So that adjustment right there made our static tweak much better. Now we're right in the middle on that bubble level. So now the next thing to do is I'm gonna come here and I'm gonna push down on that rear tower again. Come down here and take a look at the level. I'm using my other hand to stabilize the car so it stays on the rack. And now let's look at the bubble. It's barely moving. And the entire front portion of the car is a lot more stable. So we made, yes, it's a guess and check. There's no physical measurement here. But now the bubble itself is not moving very much and it stays directly into the center. And when you visually look at the tires on the front when you're pushing down, the left to right side of the suspension is not moving very much. So that helps to take care of the rear. So now let's flip the car around, set up the car in a similar fashion, looking at the grid on the tweak station, making sure your tires are centered up. And this time we're gonna push down on the front portion of the car on the static side, but we also wanna take a look at the bubble level here. So now we're looking at the tweak, the way that the preload is, what it's doing to the chassis, and we're looking at the rear. So the bubble is in the center, but it's a little bit to the right. Let me hold my wheel. We're gonna push down on the front tower, and we're gonna see what happens. So it's small, but the bubble is moving, and there's a little bit more movement here going, it's being forced downward on this left side. So being dramatic about it, it's doing this when I'm pushing down on the front. So even out your suspension. And so what that's telling me, I push down here right in the center of the shock tower. This side over here on the rear is being forced down. So that means that the preload on this side is greater than this side. We're not physically looking at the amount of space in between the threaded collar and the top. Even though that's a good place to start, maybe you want to make them even. What's more important is the way that that preload is transferred on the chassis and helping it stay balanced. The goal here is when we're on the street or on the track, is when we're making a turn, let's say we're making a left-hand turn, the goal is trying to keep the suspension and the chassis as flat as possible when you make that corner. What can happen is if your preload is off from front to back, your back end can lose traction regardless of your grip and shore value. Everything works together. You need to have proper turn tires, a good shore value of your foam. Depends on diameter, depends on the width, depends on if you're putting compound, depends on the overall chassis balance from front to rear and left to right. Depends on if you have an open diff or a spool. All these things come into factor on how well your car is cornering and turning. The goal is to have your chassis flat while you're turning, so there's most amount of even load on each tire so that you're not accidentally putting more load on one tire and losing load on another tire, and you can spin out, for example. You can have too much on one side and your car will be pushing and hopping. You can have too little on one side and you can skid out. The goal is to try to have that even amount of turn. So like we said before, there's too much preload on this side. So we're gonna loosen up this right-hand side. We're gonna start there. We're gonna bend down and we're gonna take a look at that bubble and look at our static preload. The little bubble is in between the two spots, but a little bit to the right. Now I'm gonna hold the car and we're going to push down on that front portion of the suspension, and we're going to take a look at what happens. So it's still pushing down a small amount on that right side. So we're going to loosen this up a little bit, and we're going to tighten up the left side a little bit. We're going to push down on the suspension. We're going to bend down again. Bubble is a little bit to the left, but it's in the window. Let's see what happens when we push down on our suspension. There's minimal bubble movement. Now let's see what happens if I adjust this right hand preload to a similar, it's similar, I'm not measuring here, but it's similar to left to right. Notice I adjusted that front right, and so what that's doing is it's pushing down on the ground, so to speak, more, and it's tweaking the suspension this way because it's pushing here. It uses the other tires as a fulcrum and it's moving it down. So what happened is it's pushing down on this side more, and so the bubble moved from that left side and now it's to the right side. So even for the static adjustment, you can see that shows you on the tweak station what happened. And let's push down. So that adjustment, what we did, moved the ball or the bubble into the center here, and it's keeping it there more consistently. So now that you have your front tweak set up, let's flip this back around, and you always want to go back to the first side. Doesn't matter whether you do front or rear first, in my opinion, in my experience. Bend back down, take a look. The bubble is still in the center, but a little bit to the right. Let's hold on to one of the tires. Push down on the center of the tower in the back. The bubble itself is not moving very much. When we look at the bar and the two tires here, it does not move very much either. And so now we have a relatively balanced preload on the suspension. Alright, so now let's mess up the tweak a bit. We're going to preload this right hand side a whole lot more. Effectively making the chassis imbalanced. Cannot hug the corner as tightly. And got loose there on the exit. The suspension on the right-hand side is very tight. That was a slower turn trying to compensate for what the suspension can do and can't do set up like this. There's a lot of wheel hop going through the turn. Because you can hear it in the engine. A little loose in the rear end there. Loose again in the rear. Lots and lots of wheel hop. Let's do the opposite. We're gonna loosen this left-hand side, or I'm sorry, we're gonna loosen this right-hand side. We're gonna tighten up the left-hand side, again, making it imbalanced. A little loose on that exit. Notice there's not really loose there. The goal is to have a balanced left to right suspension, so right now we're just doing right-hand turns. But we need to make left and right-hand turns.